everyone. Welcome to the second official episode of the Jedi Way. I am one of your hosts, John Rocha, sometimes known as Rocha Fett. I've seen that out there in the universe before. Joined as always, straight from Chicago over there, the lovely Laura Kelly. How are you, Laura?
I'm doing amazing. I love the Chicago accent. Thanks for putting that little spin on it. We appreciate that thing here.
Yeah, I know you're being sarcastic. I appreciate it.
No, I really do.
You've got a whole new setup. It's pretty awesome. What have you got going on there?
Yeah, welcome to my new stage setup. It's a work in progress. That I just hung up roughly 20 minutes ago. If it falls, I won't be surprised in the least. I will be alarmed though, so I'll jump when it happens. It's inevitable. But yeah, this is my new setup.
What is it? Well, can you take the viewers through what you've got there, and listeners just pay attention?
So I've got a handful of books here. I've got a good selection of my reference books from studying. I've got The Art of Star Wars Rebels. I have the new Thrawn, the newest book in the new Thrawn trilogy, which is Chaos Rising. So that's exciting. Nice. It's right on top here, so that I remind myself I need to actually read it.
Right.
And I am looking forward to it. It's just there's a lot of books out right now. I got my ZZ plant. That's Zori. She's new. She'll probably die, but she's looking really good right now because she's new. And then I've just got various artwork that I've Star Wars artwork that I've accumulated throughout the years. So I like the sort of more subtle minimalist style. So I've got these fun things over here, and yeah, it'll be a work in progress. It might shift. You never know.
I think this is our minds. So mine's all a mess back here. Yours is like very perfectly aligned and perfectly all put together as it should be, I think. Now, do you say AT-AT or do you say AT-AT? What is your
I think I tend to lean towards AT-AT just because I have to know so many vehicles in Star Wars, and there are so many variations of that. So I tend to probably lean that way. But I've been known to say both. I can go both ways on that one. What about you? Do you have a preference?
AT-AT. It's what I grew up with. That's what we said as kids. The AT-AT was something new I discovered as I got into this world of Star Wars punditry. I had no idea that people said AT-AT. So it's a big. So I always kind of ask people what they prefer, what they feel more comfortable with. Some people are very adamant that it's AT-AT, and other people are adamant that it's AT-AT. So I like to find out who I'm dealing with when we have these kinds of conversations as they come up. But thanks to all of you who watched our debut episode, over 3,000 views on that one. Pretty fantastic. So many comments, so many positive comments as well about how we're doing this show. And for those of you who might be trying us out for the first time, Laura and I basically had a really fun conversation talking about what we wanted to do with this show. I had come up with the name Jedi Way, but I knew I needed a co-host to be able to have a conversation. I'm just better with co-hosts to be able to have conversations about topics. And this show is not this is what's happening this week in Star Wars. This is a show where we tackle a concept, a theory, a character, a debate, an idea in the Star Wars franchise or in the Star Wars universe, actually. And we discuss it and give our points of views and maybe pull out some samples from the movies or animated TV shows or the books or the comic books and have conversations about them. And last week, what did we tackle last week? Do you remember, Laura?
No, I don't remember what I had for breakfast this morning. No, it was a lot of talk. It was a little bit of an intro for both of us, which is sort of fun, of where we're kind of coming at the universe in Star Wars and things that we really enjoy in it. And then you'll have to remind me of the rest of it because I honestly don't know.
I think it was basically it as we talked about how we became Star Wars fans, what still inspires us about the franchise, what inspired us at first about the franchise, and then what brought us back or what keeps bringing us back to be involved in the franchise or to keep seeing what's coming from the franchise. So we talked about all of that last week. It's about a 50-minute conversation. Trust me, it's a really good one. If you haven't watched it yet and you're stumbling upon us for the first time, I would definitely recommend you going back and listening to us talk about that. But this week, we are addressing something new that we had talked about. Laura suggested it. She said, what about hope? The idea of hope in a galaxy at war. And this seems very topical for a number of reasons. Certainly things seem to be kind of hairy nowadays in our country and in our world. And of course, Star Wars is a great reflection of what's happening in our world. Certainly it was created to kind of get us back into a positive feeling about this country after what happened with Vietnam. That's what The New Hope did. And then 80 and 82 kind of bringing us Empire Strikes Back and Jedi kind of bringing us into the 80s with this joy and fun and what have you. So, and then 90s, we got into the 90s and the 2000s, we got into the prequel trilogy, talking about trade federations and this idea of being a global economy and all of that. So there's always been reflective of what's happening in our world. And we thought this would be an interesting concept that would lead to some interesting discussion between the two of us, this idea of hope in a galaxy at war. Right, Laura?
Very much so. I very much enjoy this theme. I think it's one of those things that, hope is present through each and every single one of the Star Wars films. Each and every single one of them ends on a note of hope, no matter how dark they get. And the second chapter of each trilogy oftentimes does get a little bit dark, but it always ends on that note of hope. It's a common theme that is strung throughout the entire saga. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll get into it. And for those of you who are watching along with us, please feel free to leave a comment below as you watch us talk about it. Maybe you pull out some samples of your own. Maybe you'll have some ideas about hope and how it plays into the importance of appreciating and understanding the points of views of the filmmakers and the creators of Star Wars when they tackle each of these movies. That would be fun, or animated series, or comic book, or book, what they're tackling there. All right, Laura, where would you like to start?
So there's a lot of places that we can kind of talk about, examples of hope in the Star Wars saga and in animation, etc. But one of the things that I think is really meaningful and is really fun to kind of jump in as a starting point would be like the small acts of hope and small acts of kindness and things that we see as an example throughout the saga. So one of my favorite things, one of the things that I always think about, and I talked about how Star Wars Rebels is one of my favorite components of Star Wars storytelling, is, the very first time that we meet the Ghost Crew in Star Wars Rebels, we kind of are introduced to them as like, there's sort of this Robin Hood component to it. They're stealing from the Empire. They're giving to the, to the poor. They literally like steal, I think, like a carton of food and these crates of weapons, and they bring them to a starving village on another planet. And then they sell the weapons to an arms dealer who then gives them intelligence for basically their next mission where they can go do more good. So I love examples of that. That was a really great way to actually meet the Ghost Crew in episode 1 of Star Wars Rebels. Another great example is in Alphabet Squadron. One of the pilots meets Jyn Erso in like a sort of flashback in that novel. And basically we get this little insight as to another way that Jyn Erso, she kind of presents herself as this hardened criminal that's pretty agnostic as to what's going on and around the galaxy. But, she has these little moments in her past where she's kind of been this little vigilante going around doing these little good deeds and then kind of not really asking for anything in return, just kind of going back to her business.
Yeah. Well, I think we see it with Empress Nest as well, when Solo does what he does at the end of the movie, right? And gets the arms for them to kind of help the rebellion and giving them even more hope. Even someone like a scruffy nerf herder, Han Solo, can give some hope to a rebellion indirectly as they fight this empire. Wouldn't you say that's part of, wouldn't you say that could qualify in a small way?
Oh, 100%. And, then we see that evolution of Han Solo then later in A New Hope, where he comes back in and saves the day at the end with the battle with the Death Star. Right.
When he yells it. Star Wars Wiki is really interesting. It said they talk about hope and they say, on the face of it, faith and hope seem quite similar, but while faith allows us to trust in the unseen force and have the utmost confidence in the people and causes we believe in, hope is its more ephemeral, still intangible, but unfailingly optimistic cousin, often intertwined in the raging galactic war. Hope is the spark that ignites the fire, while faith in the cause sustains it. And I think that's what's important to think about too, is how much power there is in the word hope in Star Wars, right? We have Leia, Obi-Wan, you're my only hope, or your only hope. That moment, is the first time Luke has an understanding that there's a wider world beyond the world he's grown up in, and where that leads to, and Luke becomes the hope of so much in the original trilogy, so much of what's happening. Anakin being the hope that will balance the universe, Rey being the hope that will carry on the legacy of the Jedi. So what you say is absolutely correct, Laura, the idea that hope ends every one of these installments, because the entire premise of Star Wars was built on the idea of hope, from the first line to the last line of all these films. Certainly hope has been an integral part of it and necessary part of it, because I think we all, and this is what makes the franchise so universal, we all want to achieve or aspire to do something in our world. It could be a very small thing. Hey, I just want to be the manager, or I just want to, be able to support my family, or I want to live in a decent place, or I want to be able to succeed and have my name in the lights. They're all different levels of the things that you want to achieve in life, but you hope to have the opportunity, right? And you believe in yourself to find that opportunity in the world, and certainly throughout. And sometimes hope is thrust upon you, the mantle of hope. And certainly Luke, when he discovers who he's supposed to be and who his dad is, then the idea of hope becomes a very powerful thing, because he realizes he is a symbol to bring hope back to the universe by redeeming his father.
I love that example of Luke sort of being this big beacon of hope, because I always think of Leia really as more of that in the original trilogy, especially. She's literally like this beacon of hope. She's dressed in all white. She's got her little, the message where she's actually glowing and telling Obi-Wan that he's the only hope. And so I always kind of think of her that way. And Luke kind of really starts off as this kid of like, I can't go on this adventure to Alderaan. I need to go home and I need to get home for dinner. Like I've got stuff I have to do here. But I also love, that he has those aspirations to fly among the stars. And Anakin had that too, in the aspect of that the greatness sort of being thrust upon you, I think is really apparent in characters like Padme Amidala, who was obviously, went into an election willingly, to become queen, but probably didn't expect, to pretty much be the onset of what ended up being a full-blown war by the end of the prequels. So I like to think of, I think of her as that sort of symbol too of, one of those things where this great adventure was thrust upon you, and you can either take up the beacon or you can give up. And she very much was the symbol of hope for many throughout the galaxy, and especially on her planet.
That's an excellent point you bring up, the correlation between Padme and Amidala. I'm sorry, Padme and Leia, their connection, both wearing white. Obviously that was done in retrospect, and the connection they have and the symbol they are for their people and the people of the rebellion. Leia is the one that never quits. Leia is the one that's always on the front lines, always bringing it back. She doesn't hide out in Ahch-To, being unable to be part of it because she messed up Ben Solo. Even though Ben Solo is her child, she still understands that she must be this beacon of hope, this symbol of hope for the rebellion, no matter if they're fighting the Empire or the First Order. That's an excellent, excellent point. And she has to do that because she carries the weight of her station as a princess. Even though she wasn't necessarily born into royalty, she was adopted into royalty. And so she feels a bigger picture approach to it all and understands that you will sometimes take losses coupled with your victories. And it's those victories that give you that little bit of extra hope. What does Poe say is that what the hope is, that spark that will light the fire that will burn down the First Order. Even Holdo Holdo eventually kind of sees Poe Dameron's point of view in this as well, and she talks about the power of hope when they're all on that destroyer before they take off on the ship, on the little mini ship. So that's always prevalent as well. I mean, you make an excellent point with Amidala and Leia. I hadn't thought of it that way, so color me taken aback. All right, Laura. All right, you win this round, Laura. You win this round.
It's unlike me to actually bring Padme Amidala up in a sort of more of a light. She was never really one of my favorite characters. And it's one of those things where so many people I think really idolize her. She was this great, strong character, but for me personally, she was always just never as big as I wanted her to be, and just she was always just so much more subtle, which really worked for her and was really part of her character. But when I was first watching these movies, I didn't really get that. And I think sort of reading some of the, the ancillary material, like things like Queen's Shadow and Queen's Peril, and even the second book in the New Thrawn trilogy really opened my eyes to all of the things that Padme really was and all the things that she meant to, you know, not just like the galaxy in universe, but also the fans as a whole and the fandom as a whole.
Right. And we talk about hope in a time of war and the importance of that. Right. And you look at, if we take it into real world situations, certainly that you can go and study the situation in Dunkirk, what happened in Dunkirk and how these boats, these civilian boats, went over and saved these soldiers from what could have been certain death at the hands of the Germans or the Nazis there. All of that is these small acts of hope that you spoke about a few minutes ago. It's those kinds of things that you find in the middle of war. It's the unlikely heroes, the unlikely moments, the unpredictable things that can happen that inspire people to do these things that are selfless and beyond themselves in order to make even just the slightest bit of difference or shift the scale just that extra bit that helps their side win in a situation like this. But you have to hope, you have to believe that it's possible. You have to hope that you can put this thing together and get it right. And so that is always something that keeps you going through time. And how many people, how many people suffer through war-torn areas, Laura, in our world? You know, what happened with Yugoslavia, what happens in the Middle East? People, you know, have to come to terms with the situation that they're growing up in and hope for better, hope for peace, hope for resolution, hope for just to get through the day, you know, and survive the day. Those things are so important. Even what Andy Dufresne says that in Shawshank Redemption, hope is one of the most dangerous things you can have in life, because it can make you feel like you're trapped if you can't find your way out of something. But, you know, but also hope is the thing that can inspire you to go beyond the walls, you know, and that's important too.
I love you bringing up that idea of the quote about hope is from Shawshank is not something I've heard before, because I haven't seen that movie because I suck.
Oh my Lord.
Okay, but there is an interesting moment in the Hunger Games, hear me out, where President Snow brings up that same point where you cannot, you know, he's the ultimate villain in that story, and he makes the point that you cannot kill hope in this world. We have to make sure that the districts and the people and the, you know, the poorest people in this country still have hope. They still have to have something to reach for. Because when they don't, that's when things get really bad. So, you know, it's a common thread throughout storytelling. But you mentioned, you know, acts of selflessness in Star Wars. And I think we can dive into that too. Yep. And, you know, one of my favorite acts of and you can talk about sacrifice being probably the ultimate act of selflessness. And there are tons of examples of that in Star Wars. But I think when it comes to acts of selflessness that ultimately don't end in a sacrifice, the first thing I think of is Luke Skywalker and Return of the Jedi. You know, at that point, we get to that point in that movie, or even just the beginning of the movie, where we find out like Luke's dressed in all black and he's this all powerful, almighty Jedi, and he looks like a badass and he's all grown up. And, you know, even in the end, despite all that power and all that knowledge he has now, that he throws his weapon aside and he has, you know, he still chooses to be selfless and he still chooses to love this father and save him, even though Vader really did not ever earn that by any any sense of the word, I don't think, up to that point.
No, it's a great point you bring up, because our natural inclination when we see good versus evil in the fight is to cheer for good, to destroy evil or defeat evil. What Luke does, and I think it's brilliant by Lucas and everybody involved with Jedi, is they zig when you expect them to zag. Luke throwing away the weapon, Luke choosing love over fear, love over hate, love over anger, violence. He chooses love at what could possibly be his own expense. And the Emperor understands, after he's done with all his histrionics, the Emperor understands how dangerous this concept really is that Luke is presenting, this idea of hope. There's nothing a dictator or wannabe dictator hates more than the idea of having a populace or a public that believes in hope, because they can't be controlled if they believe in hope. They fight back. Hope is what gives them the inspiration to fight back in an interesting and different ways. And Luke, in that moment, throwing away the lightsaber, putting himself himself at the mercy of his father and the mercy of Emperor Palpatine in that moment is such a selfless act, as you said, but also as the ultimate belief in what he is doing is right, and he is willing to die for it to prove his point and get through to his father, which he eventually does.
Yeah, and I think about how that eventually evolved in how that story sort of continued to apply in The Last Jedi. I mean, that was obviously ended a different ending where Luke ended up, sacrificing himself as in this last stitch effort to try and connect with his nephew. Or really, maybe at that point, it wasn't even really about connecting with Kylo Ren. It was really more about, buying time to save the Resistance.
Right.
And, being there in the Resistance and in Leia's absolute darkest moment.
Yeah, to provide hope, right? He's in there to provide hope at the darkest moment, brings her the dice from Han, having that connection with her, and then steps out to confront the lineage of his own family there in Ben Solo. And so it's that moment once again, stepping forward to give them a little bit of time, but also to confront this idea of the darkness there, and somehow in his own way try to redeem Ben and bring him close, or at least to bring him closer to the possibility of redemption. And once again, he doesn't throw away his saber. He's actually not even, the saber doesn't even exist in that moment. So it's all for show. So once again, Luke chooses not to actually actively fight the villain of the piece in that moment as well. It's a perfect connection you make here, Laura. Once again, choosing the different path than you expect him to choose, but no less badass and no less incredible.
Exactly. And I think that, that element of darkness that we see in The Last Jedi, it's sort of reflected in, I think, every second chapter of every trilogy, where you really have to be in the darkest part of the night before you can get to dawn. And I think with The Last Jedi in particular, even, we talked a lot about Leia and how for the last 5 movies up to that point, she has been the beacon of hope, and that it's only at the end of that, that 8th or that 5th movie, I guess, and, that we've seen her in, that she really reaches her darkest moment, and she really reaches this point of hopelessness, and it's so sad and it's so devastating. And I think that letting Leia have that very vulnerable, very human moment and that human connection with Luke in Luke's final moments was so meaningful, and it really made, I think, Luke's sacrifice all the more powerful for me. It made the ending of that movie all the more powerful. And it's one of the reasons I love that movie so much, but it's a really great moment for Leia. And I'm so glad that we got it in that movie before, unfortunately, we lost Carrie Fisher after that.
Right. And I think I want to take a little bit of a turn here. What about the characters on the dark side, right? I mean, they have hope, don't they? Palpatine hopes to rule the galaxy. Vader hopes to, rule by his side. Later on, Snoke, aka Palpatine, same thing, hopes to extinguish the Jedi once and for all. Kylo has his hope. Ben Solo, he has his hope of what he wants to reach, which is peace. And we talked about this yesterday in our pre-production meeting, the idea of hope, 2 hopes battling each other in the throne room in The Last Jedi, right? Rey hoping to bring Ben back to the light, Ben hoping to bring Rey into the dark to rule the galaxy in a new way.
Yeah, and I think that scene in the throne room, where the 2 of them finally team up against the Praetorian Guards, and leading up to that moment, they both had this vision, like, this other person is going to join me. I'm going to have a buddy on this journey to my ultimate goal. And I think that was really interesting. As someone who I've been a Kylo Ren Ben Solo fan for a little while now. I really enjoy that character. I think he's really well rounded, and I think I love thinking about how in that moment in the throne room, when he's holding out his hand for her and he's telling her to join me. I wonder at that moment, like, when was the last time that character really felt any sense of hope or anything good. Like in the last like 6 years, I think is how long it's been since his sort of fall to the dark side. And I think about that moment of what that must have meant for him as the villain in our story, or as one of the villains in our story. And, I think about Vader in that moment where he finds out that Luke Skywalker is his son, and he thinks like, there's this force that exists out there, and if I can find it, and if I can convince it to join me, then we can overthrow the Emperor, and I can finally rule the galaxy like I had originally, wanted with Padme back at the end of Revenge of the Sith. So it's really interesting, I think, taking a step back and looking at the villain's point of view of where their hope comes from. And Snoke's an interesting one, since now we just know that he was made in a test tube and he was just the Emperor all along. I'm not sure what he was ever hoping or aspiring for.
Does he have emotions at all? I don't know.
Did he go rogue? Was he existing on his own plane? Was he an experiment that got wrong? I don't know. But yeah, it's I love kind of taking a look back at, Star Wars does such a great job, I think, with villains and making them these really well-rounded characters. And I one of the throne room scene is one of those for me that, really takes the cake.
Absolutely. I mean, Rogue One is also just laced with the idea of hope throughout. I mean, even the last line is what did they deliver us? And Leia says, the CGI Leia says hope. And just simply, just that word, just that one simple word can carry so much weight. But throughout the movie, initially it's Jyn resisting this idea of wanting to be a part of this rebellion. But it's once she understands what the rebellion symbolizes and the hope it brings to people, the downtrodden people in the world, she sees a bigger picture than just her trying to, forage or steal or manipulate or connive to live through the day into the next day. There's more for her that she's meant for. And when she sees that vision of her dad from the message that is brought there in what's his face's place, hope grows in her now. That moment reawakens her hope of reuniting with her father, her hope of fighting for something bigger, and that is the journey that she goes on throughout the movie. And at the end, making the ultimate sacrifice, as they all do, to bring hope to the galaxy.
And it's so great when we get characters like that and we get those sorts of stories, because those lessons and those stories are really woven throughout, other places in Star Wars storytelling. And it's unfortunate that we only got Jyn Erso for that one movie, because you look at a character like Ezra Bridger from Star Wars Rebels, where in his first lesson in that show is that you can be more than just a survivor. You can do more than just exist and survive in this universe. And there's so much more that you can offer the galaxy, and here's 4 more seasons of you learning how to do that. And then also, ultimately making a huge sacrifice and not necessarily dying, we assume, but disappearing off into God only knows where.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I enjoy seeing that as well, but is Sabine, what is Sabine? Does Sabine symbolize hope for the Mandalorians, for her people, or is her sister Bo-Katan the hope in that situation?
Well, they're not sisters, but they're, it's the moment where Sabine is basically handed the Darksaber, and she wins it. And, that's basically the symbol of like, well, now you get to lead the Mandalorians. But she has, I think, the sense to know that this isn't my place to stay here with my people. I have my found family, and it's my place to be with them. And so she makes that sacrifice to hand over the Darksaber to Bo-Katan, who she believes to be the rightful leader, which, I guess has sort of yet to be seen. We don't know what happened after Bo-Katan got the Darksaber, and what happened in between that and when Moff Gideon ended up with it in The Mandalorian. So it'd be great to get that story someday. But yeah, I think Sabine especially in those final episodes, she's a huge symbol of hope. And Ezra really hands over the beacon to her when he makes that ultimate sacrifice and knows that this is the end for him, and this is the end for his story with this family that he's found and he's established with the Ghost Crew. And he leaves it to Sabine to take up the mantle and to see where that story goes from there.
Yeah, you've spoken about Ahsoka Tano, the hope she symbolizes for you. Is there more you can go into about that?
Ahsoka, I think, is just one of those characters for me that she's just, I mean, part of it is that she's just so cool. And I think a big part of that is what the journey that we got to see her go on. And it's really, I feel so privileged, and so many people that, you know, got her story, the full round story from Clone Wars to Rebels. So, you know, it's rare that we get that privilege to get to see the character grow so much over that many years and that huge time period. It's so great. So I think that's really part of it. She's just she's a wonderfully, like, you know, round character all around, and that's great. But she has, you know, that ultimate moment of sacrifice too, and in season 2 of Rebels, where she's battling Vader on Malachor. I don't know.
It's pretty awesome. Yeah,
it's great. But that, you know, those moments of sacrifice, I think, are really meaningful for me. That's one of those things that really inspire me anytime. And, you know, they bring out all of the feels for so many fans. And the season 2 finale of Rebels was a big one. And Kanan Jarrus at the end of season 4, that was a big one too.
Yeah. Well, you spoke earlier about Darkest Before the Dawn. You talk about in the onset of war in the prequel trilogy, this idea of what's coming here with the Attack of the Clones and all of that. Then, of course, in the original trilogy, there's this feeling at the end of the second film, Luke has lost his hand. Vader is his dad. The rebellion is on the run, you know. And then in the sequel trilogy, how a majority of the resistance forces are lost, and Leia is there, and Luke is dead. But still, there is possibility. There is always hope, even in the direst of circumstances. And Star Wars seems to aspire to show you that. Maybe because we all feel that way, don't you think, Laura? Maybe we all have that moment where we're like, what's the point, or how much more can I take, or God, I hate what I'm doing, or I hate where my life is at, or I just don't like where I'm at right now. And it seems like I'm just stuck in this same cycle over and over again. Star Wars seems to make it universal. Yeah, none of us are probably getting our hands, or a lot of us aren't probably going to get our hands cut off, or finding out our dad's a mass murderer or anything like that. But the feeling is that feeling of despondency, that feeling that like all hope is almost gone, you know, and they find a way to bring it back.
Yeah, and I always think that, you know, especially with Leia, from everywhere we see her go and all of the things that we see her endure, I always think, like, how in the world has that character not just given up? I mean, it's just, she endures so much, and she just has to, like, keep on. I mean, she, like, loses her whole planet, and then she's comforting Luke on the Millennium Falcon when he loses, 3 people that are meaningful to him. I'm like, she lost, like, the whole planet. Okay. You know, for Leia, I think that is where that plays in a lot. But I think when it comes to the second chapter of each trilogy, Rian Johnson and Irvin Kershner and George Lucas, and when they had to do the second movie in their trilogy, they each had one task that they really had to accomplish in their respective trilogy. They had to test our heroes, and they had to let them fail. And I think, you know, they have to sort of set up the question that Alfred once asked Bruce Wayne, which is, why do we fall? Yeah. So that in movie 3, we can learn to pick ourselves back up again.
Yeah. Yeah. Because that's, we all go through that in life, right? We all go through that moment where we fall, or multiple moments where we fall and have to come back up again. Right. I mean, as people listening to this, we fell last Friday, and now we have to come back up again in the Schmodown Teams tournament and try to get our belts back from your terrible, terrible teammates. So, I mean, that's that's so a symbol of hope for us, you know. You've got here in the notes what I think is fantastic. You said a moment in Star Wars that inspired you, or inspired hope in you. Is there something there for you?
You know, I've talked about Kanan Jarrus a lot. I'm going to bring him up again because I just love that character so much in Star Wars Rebels. Yeah. And, you know, Freddie Prinze Jr.'s delivery in acting in that show was just phenomenal for me. And, you know, Dave Filoni always delivers. And this was definitely one of those cases, I think. You know, Kanan Jarrus is this character that has been living on borrowed time since Order 66. And it's, you know, he's this Jedi that survived and got away, and, you know, lived under a pseudonym, and then, you know, had some adventures and had moments of hopelessness, and then, you know, meets up with Hera.
Not even a full Jedi. He was a Padawan still in training, Laura. So he wasn't even a full Jedi yet. Yeah, incredible.
Yeah, and had to watch his master, you know, go down at the hands of the clones that he trusted. And, you know, his story is so tragic, but he managed to survive. And then, you go back and watch season 4 of Star Wars Rebels, and you can really see that buildup and kind of see the Force like warning him that the clock is ticking,
right,
and there's one last thing that you need to accomplish here before you move on to this next thing. And that rewatching that story and watching his story from the beginning for me was so inspirational. And he makes that ultimate sacrifice, as you know, these characters that we love often do. And it was, that was probably one of the more inspirational moments for me, is his whole story. How about you? Do you have something that inspires you? Is there something that really stands out?
When you're younger, it's the two sons moment, right? This idea of what's out there, this idea of where to go, and the possibilities and all of the hope that could lead to, you know, this thing that's out there. But as you get older, you start to find a connection in the older characters and the way they look at things and how they approach hope, the idea of hope. And hope isn't just like, hey, let me, you know, help you believe. Hope is also, let me put lessons inside you that will bear fruit when the moment comes. And so for me, it always goes back to Dagobah and the swamp. It is always that. As much as I think the selfless sacrifice of Kenobi, when he puts his lightsaber down and also accepts death at the hands of Anakin, or Vader, whatever you want to call him in that moment, to inspire Luke in some way to fight, to keep the fight going. He is giving hope to the resistance, to the rebellion rather, through his sacrifice to Luke. I think in Dagobah, what Yoda is putting in Luke are the tools that will give him the strength and the confidence and the power to inspire hope in others. If you see someone who is leading you, who is, you know, smart and strong and knows exactly how to use what he's got to help you win, then that inspires you, right? A great leader will always inspire you and give you hope that it's possible, that anything is possible. And so I find that with Yoda, his lessons that he teaches Luke throughout that whole section of Empire Strikes Back is fantastic and inspires hope in me, because those life lessons are always, whenever I go back and watch the movie, sadly, and most assuredly, I think for a lot of people in the world, you gotta have to hear that lesson over again sometimes, because you forget it, because the world gets so cluttered in your brain. Listening to those lessons can give you hope again about your life, can give you help you to remember how to walk that path again, so you can bring hope back into your world. So I think I think that's something that really stands out for me as a symbol of hope in Star Wars.
It's a beautiful sentiment. And Yoda's, when you move beyond the prequel trilogy, Yoda's just the ultimate. He made so many mistakes in the prequels and led the Jedi down, unfortunately, along the wrong path. And it's weird at his age that happened. But by the time we see him in Empire, and then I think definitely when we see him in The Last Jedi, I love the lessons that he brings to the table.
Yes. That's a symbol of hope, isn't it? That sequence when he sits down with Luke and he says, and I know some people made fun of it, which drove me insane, because it's true. And maybe when you're young, you don't understand. When you get older, you will. Teaching them the failures are just as important as the successes, because you're going to fail. You're going to fail every once in a while, or a lot, before it finally happens for you. And that's part of the journey. Failing is part of the journey to success. It's, maybe you could argue, the most essential part of it, because you learn more from that than you do from success. So yeah, I agree with you. I love that those conversations he has with Luke there by the tree. It's brilliant. And I thought it was gutsy to put it in the movie for Rian Johnson. Just if you hadn't put in those mama jokes, that'd have been okay.
Gutsy alone just to bring back the puppet. I mean, it could have looked really bad.
True, an ancient puppet. Well, before we wrap up this episode, and it seems time is flying by so quickly as we come to the end of this episode, we should talk about something. We talked about it in the pre-production meeting, this idea of looping it back to what's happening this week. There was news that broke that Kathleen Kennedy had an interview with The Wrap and spoke about how Lucasfilm and Disney are taking a step back to really absorb what George Lucas created. And I know that was a little bit surprising to see her delivering this on the heels of DC Fandom, like kind of owning the weekend. There didn't need to be any other news kind of roaming around, but for her to give this interview at this time, it's almost like by saying these things that she said, in some way, she's inspired hope for people who maybe weren't happy with how things were going. And so her saying that she's going to take a step back, Lucasfilm is going to take a step back. Maybe that inspires hope in people that we will get Star Wars that feels more like Mandalorian and less like maybe Rise of Skywalker. So in some indirect way, she's inspiring hope amongst the fandom. What do you think about that?
Oh, I want to believe that, but it just sounds so corporate-y to me, you know? And I think that, I think my issue is that I kind of question, you know, Bob Iger said something really similar when Solo came out and didn't do as well at the box office. And so if they were taking a step back then and we got the Rise of Skywalker out of that, I'm a little bit worried about, you know, what taking a step back means. So I'm a little bit, I don't know. I kind of question what's really going on behind the scenes when it comes to that kind of talk. But you know, obviously they're in a good place with Mandalorian. They've got a good thing going with Jon Favreau. And with season 2, the fact that season 3 is already being talked about, you know, something has been successful in that, and it seems to be universally loved, which is fantastic. I mean, I remember sitting at home like over Christmas and even over Thanksgiving, like watching The Mandalorian with my family who are not Star Wars fans. Like they are not, I mean, like most of them haven't seen all of the movies. Some of them haven't seen any of them. And we all got to sit down and like really enjoy this thing that they could all get enjoyment out of, you know, whether or not they had all the background knowledge that I have or not. So they're doing something right. And I have to kind of think that, you know, that we're lucky to have some creatives that are working on Star Wars right now that are taking that message to heart. And they're telling great stories, and, you know, you can dress up these stories however you want with X-Wings and space battles and sword fights and romance. But, you know, as long as they're always bringing it back around to the message of Star Wars, which I think one of the core messages is hope, you know, what we've talked about today, then I think that, you know, hopefully the future is bright.
Well, you said you were with Filoni. What did you want to mention from Dave Filoni on the Disney Gallery series that he spoke about?
Yeah, I mean, Disney, if anybody watched the Disney Gallery series, you know that Dave Filoni went on, like, I think it ended up being like a 15-minute monologue about fantastic. It was so good. I could just watch it over and over again. But one of the things that really struck me, and I went back and rewatched that again after I heard about, you know, Kathleen Kennedy's interview with The Wrap. And Dave Filoni talks about how hope was so important to George Lucas. And, you know, he talks about the conversations that they would have while working on the Clone Wars. And Lucas told him, remember to make these stories hopeful. Remember to give that to kids because they really need it. And I hope that there are other creatives besides Dave Filoni that are getting that message and taking it to heart.
Yeah. And it's funny because, you know, I know Lucas has that a great quote. He says, like, you know, if you can figure out the mind of an 11-year-old girl, you can be successful in Hollywood and what they aspire to have. But I think it's that idea of 11. Anybody who's 11 years old has this idea of what they hope to have in their future, right? But all of us, especially the last few generations, I think, of human beings on this earth, have never let go of that inner child, this idea of wanting hope, the belief that more is possible, that we can be better as a species, we can be better as a people, we can be better as a world. That is always prevalent throughout. So although these messages of hope are delivered towards children in Star Wars to appeal to the young kids in Star Wars because they believe in the most hope, those of us who are younger and have been through the wars of life, coming back to remember those messages or relive those messages of hope are important as well, I would think.
100%. I agree with you 100%. That's great.
All right. Well, I think we've talked about hope for quite some time now. Let's kind of put a pin on this one here. Laura, any last words you want to leave people with?
No, I think this is a great discussion, and I really enjoyed it. And I think that I love that this show, we can kind of come at Star Wars from different points of view and from different areas of love. and really, still be able to have a civilized conversation about it. Like, I think that gives me hope for, for everybody else out there that's arguing out there in the fandom, and there are a lot of them. The fact that we can successfully do this, so fingers crossed that we can keep it going. I'll leave it to
absolutely. you. I'm enjoying it with you too, Laura. And to me, this is what I enjoy about the discussion of these kinds of geek nerd properties, whatever you want to call them. Just this franchise itself, Star Wars, is the conversations around the concepts and the theories and the ideas and the things that are posed by them throughout all their different media. It's important to just have the conversation about it. There is the need to be vitriolic about it. Has always escaped me, because these are things of entertainment that were brought about to give people hope and inspire people and leave people with positive messages about how to live in the world and how to communicate with each other. So I feel like getting into the toxicity of it all, or wading in and becoming toxic yourself, is against the Star Wars message and against what George Lucas intended, and anybody who's done really well with Star Wars intends with the work they do within the franchise. So yeah, I love it too. I'm having a great time as well. I think we want to sign off, right? We kind of have our own idea of how we want to sign off with this, and we will in just a second. But please, Laura, tell them where they can find you, what you've got going on, and more of your Star Wars goodness.
Absolutely. So I am at @shutup_Laura on Twitter and Instagram. You can see my handle just below right there. And I co-host the podcast Force Toast, a Star Wars happy hour with my friend Alice, where we drink wine and talk about Star Wars. And it's a grand old time. So definitely check that out too. That is at Force Toast Pod on Twitter.
You can follow me at The Rocha Says on Twitter and on Instagram, and this is on the Outlaw Nation channel, so please subscribe down below there. Give it some love. I think Laura and I are going to work on down the road, like some more, maybe smaller Star Wars conversations we can have about things that are occurring in the world that are accompanying the larger show that we do every couple of weeks here on the Outlaw Nation channel. So tune in for more of that down the road. So give us a subscribe down below. Also, give this video a like if you're so inclined, and leave a comment. The more likes, the more comments you leave, it kind of raises the visibility of the show and the channel in the algorithm of YouTube, and puts it there on the side for maybe a Star Wars fan who is looking for a show that's pretty chill and has a bunch of fun conversations in them, to give a chance to the Jedi Way and come aboard our train as well, or come aboard our ship, whatever you want to say there. So please do that, and share the video as well on your social media. I think it's really important to do that as well, because when you share it, you're telling your friends and family who follow you and who respect your opinion that this is a good show and that they should give it a shot, and maybe they'll come aboard and be a part of the Jedi Way crew as well. So, all right, what shall we leave them with, Laura?
Well, I think we'll leave them with a thank you for joining us for the second episode of the Jedi Way. And until next time, remember, your focus determines your reality.
Absolutely.